Yeah, it's been a really nasty experience as a Jew in the Labour Party. A party member posted online comments saying that Israel was responsible for the creation of ISIS and also for 9/11. And when I saw the individual at party conference, and I was absolutely horrified that nothing had been done. I'd really like Jeremy Corbyn to show leadership on this issue.
It's a genuine question. If you say...
One party member was attending her first conference.
I heard there was a Labour Friends of Israel stall, and I thought this would be a really good opportunity to have a dialogue with a group I know who have a lot of influence, and it would be very interesting to hear their ideas. So I found where their stall was.
Can I just ask you, you're very anti the settlements. What is Labour Friends of Israel doing about they are really...
We make our view clear, and we meet with people at all levels in Israeli politics and diplomatic circles, etc. And we make it absolutely clear we're not friends of Israel, enemies of Palestine. Hence our new campaign launching next month and that we're showcasing here. We believe in a two-state solution in coexistence and self-determination for both people, and that's really...
How will that come about, do you think?
Well, our job is to support any possible means that can bring it about.
So
what are we supporting is a coexistence project, which is what this is about.
I had no idea, quite honestly, who was behind the stall. There was a woman behind the stall. My first series of questions from memory was simply to say I was very interested to know how a two-state solution would come about. What would be the details, not a slogan, but the details.
Would you like Israeli occupation?
Well, what we want is a two-state solution. And the reason we've not got it now at the moment is because there's a distinct lack of security for Israel.
Supporters of a two-state solution believe that a peace deal based on national boundaries that existed in 1967, before Israel's occupation, will one day lead to a viable Palestinian state. But the continued growth of Israeli settlements on occupied land has made an independent state all but impossible.
If you look at a map of the West Bank and East Jerusalem today, you are looking at a fragmented territory that Israel has colonized now for almost half a century. Practically speaking, a two-state solution is just not possible under these conditions.
I was actually seeking some reassurance that a two-state solution, if that's what they were promoting, was still possible.
This is a big picture situation, and we want a two-state solution that is good for all.
Times, what steps? Because, you know, so the Labour Party that's saying...
I'm not going to defend or criticise
It seems as if you are defending Israel.
I would defend Israel. I defend Israel's right to exist. I defend Israel as a democracy and a social
sense. We don't suffer.
I think we have to be very, very careful not to let our feelings about this morph.
So no feelings come into
anti-Zionism.
I'm not being anti-Zionist. We have to be very careful anti-Zionist.
Don't we all want a two-state solution based on coexistence and peace?
I said time and again, I'm here to talk about the two-state solution which you are promoting. And this is what I'd like to learn about.
It's clear that the Israeli state, no matter which party is in power, has got absolutely no desire or inclination to relinquish the territories occupied after 1967. But the questions that that throws up are the kinds of questions that people don't want to ask or don't want to answer.
I'm asking you how. So you are bringing your effort,
and we make
I don't know what I think.
Anyone who supports Israel has to ask himself or herself the following question. There are two possible scenarios, and only two possible scenarios. Either I support the new state of Israel, which is an ethnic apartheid state, or I support a change of regime in Israel, namely that the state and the country as a whole would go through a genuine process of democratization, as did apartheid South Africa. There is no third option.
Thank you, Jean. I've enjoyed the conversation.
I'm asking you about settlements. They've totally atomised the whole of the West Bank. I'm asking you, I'm really genuinely interested, how is two-state solution, but how can it come about if the whole of the West Bank is atomised? So, but in practical terms,
that's what you're doing.
but I'm asking, in terms of the West Bank is atomised, where will the state be? I mean, that's a genuine question. Where will the state be?
The activist who came to ask her tough questions about the settlements, actually, that was her main point. She didn't ask her about Judaism or the existence of Israel. She just wanted a straight answer. How does anyone who supports Israel justify the settlements?
We go over there, we witness, but nothing changes. I was quite interested in whatever funds they had and influence they had, how would this bring about a two-state solution? That was my very basic question. You've got a lot of money, you've got a lot of prestige in the world.
I don't know where you get that.
Sorry?
Labour Friends Israel got a lot of power, a lot of money.
Well, I think so. I hear that it's a stepping stone to good jobs. A friend of mine's son's got a really good job at Oxford University on the basis of having worked for Labour Friends of Israel.
If you just believe rumours, then
it's not a rumour, it's a fact.
It's anti-Semitic.
No, it's not anti-Semitic.
It's a trend. It's about conspiracy theories.
It's not.
Sorry, it is.
It's not.
Anyway, that's my view, and I think we have to agree to differ.
No, I don't think we do have to agree to differ.
I'm agreeing to differ. I'm ending the conversation because I am not really wishing to engage in a conversation that talks about get involved with this and then you get a good job in Oxford or the city or that is anti-Semitic. Sorry.
But do you think that...
Joan Ryan falsely claimed that Jean referred to jobs in the city, London's financial centre.
And it comes very clearly in the discussions that you have filmed that the woman was not anti-Semitic. They know it. She didn't talk like an anti-Semitic person. She was a typical pro-Palestinian person who was worried about the violations of the Palestinian human and civil rights.
Ryan continued to reference banking, a traditional anti-Semitic trope, as she left the conference hall with our undercover reporter. But Jean had never mentioned it.
Anti-Semitic. You heard her say, join you lot and you get into Oxford or you get into work in the bank or anti-Semitic.
At no point did I ever say that Labour Friends of Israel will get people jobs in banking in the city. I did say, which is absolutely true, that I know the son of a friend of mine who he believed himself that having some connection with Labour Friends of Israel didn't harm his career at all.
That evening, at a rally to combat anti-Semitism organized by the Jewish labor movement, Joan Ryan described her day at the stall.
But we have also had 3 incidents of anti-Semitic harassment on our stand to the people who are staffing that stall today. And that, I think, tells you something about why we need to be having this against anti-Semitism rally.
By the following day, word had spread about Jean's exchange at the LFI stall. Several MPs came by and expressed concern, including Jeremy Corbyn's former challenger, Angela Eagle.
I think we had a couple of problems yesterday, but today's been better, where we did have one person towards the end of the day come and say the anti-Semitism is just being used to crush Jeremy, and that the allegations are sort of made up to a certain extent, which is obviously awful, but compared with stuff yesterday, it's sort of not that as bad. some of that sort of stuff is now becoming normalised. Sort of less shocked about that than I was about that happened yesterday. I know, tell me about it. How are you anyway? You okay?
I'm absolutely loving it.
As well as Jean's case, other alleged incidents of anti-Semitism involve the attempt to replace the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Another prominent Corbyn opponent arrives at the stall and hugs Jennifer Gerber, the director of the LFI. Labour MP Shaka Umana asks for an update on the anti-Semitic incidents.
What exactly happened?
Oh God, yeah. Actually,
one Nazi came up and basically said the coup was run by Jews, Jewish MPs and Jewish millionaires. And Andrew Eagle's husband apparently is
Jewish.
No, you couldn't make it up, could you? We reported it.
And so that was incident one. What were the other two?
Joan, Joan dealt with the other instance.
Right.
The other instance yesterday.
I reported that incident, that woman. She took a video of me then. Joan Ryan, Labour Friends of Israel,
I'm not sure
walking away while answering questions. They didn't show any of the bits where I said, you know, you're being anti-Semitic, don't you?
That's obviously come to an end.
So I made a formal complaint.
I am very shocked about the way she described my words to other people. I feel very anxious and that she should be misinterpreting me totally to other people. I find that very, very worrying.
But I mean, I wrote down, you know, all this what she was saying about being rich and powerful, the one who went to Oxford, and the next minute he's got a big job in banking, you know, and I said that, you know, classic anti-Semitic.
I have no idea how she got from A to Z, going from my comment, which was what it was, to then saying he got a big job in banking. Maybe she believes her own trope, if that's the word they use.
We had a woman saying, no, I've never seen anti-Semitism. My Jewish friends have. We said, well, it is real. Is it real? Is it really real? It's just being used to crush Corbyn.
Undermine Corbyn.
And I said, there's a bit, you know, as a Jew, like, would you say that to any other, you know, like, I've experienced homophobia, but I don't deny it. But anyway, it's only a few, I guess. Yeah. That's the way it's out of it.
People be positive. We signed up lots of people.
Yeah, do you know what? Most people have been positive and nice. It's kind of like solidarity. People are coming up like solidarity. It's like solidarity, guys. Are you okay? How's your day?
It's disgraceful.
We'll prevail. Yes. We'll prevail in the end.
I like that.
Definitely.
It's in a way pathetic, but it's also worrying how such a pathetic evidence can, and we know, can be used to intimidate Jeremy Corbyn into establishing an inquiry commission, in making daily confessions that he's not anti-Semitic, and so on.
That is, I think, going to be the defining narrative, actually, now, which is anti-Semitism. And do you know what? That denies, you know, what I found, I said to her, you heard me a couple of times saying, I find that upsetting that as a Jew, you're telling me, like, and she didn't give up.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, I think it's, if an anti-Semite comes up, you know, if somebody says to me, Jews, they're all big noses and control the world. I'm like, wow, but you're an anti-Semite, that's terrible. Someone like her worries me more, because is she an anti-Semite? I don't know. But she basically denies the fact that it exists. She just thinks it's made up. And
the group discusses which act of alleged anti-Semitism was worse. Rubin believes that Jean's discussion with Joan Ryan was amongst the most serious.
I know. It's just the stuff yesterday was like explicit anti-Semitism.
Difficult Moments woman who told us that anti-Semitism, you know, is being concocted to crush Corbyn. That is what she said. And I think people, like, if we're not getting it out there.
Yeah.
But is that anti-Semitic, guys? I don't know, like...
That's the guy, I don't know where my line is anymore. I think it's different to yesterday.
I think if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I think that's the point at which you call it out and report it. And that's why Joan convinced me to report the one yesterday, because I was made to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And although nothing anti-Semitic was said, I'm sure there were undertones of it, and it was brought upon by that context.
I thought Labour Friends of Israel were talking about Palestine because they were promoting a two-state solution. Now I find they don't want to talk about Palestine. And if you do talk about Palestine, it would appear you're kind of sucked into having an accusation of anti-Semitism brought against you.
At the end of the day, if you feel offended by it and uncomfortable for it, this should be a safe space, and anything that breaks that should be reported, I think. There is that line, obviously. I don't know.
So they're really scratching the bottom of the barrel to make a list of 2.5 cases of anti-Semitism. 2 out of the 3, they themselves are not totally sure that they fall into their own strict definition of anti-Semitism.
Jean was unaware that her exchange with Joan Ryan had made national news and that a complaint of anti-Semitism was lodged.
I felt overwhelmed by being at the conference. I had no idea there would be so many things to go to, so many interesting workshops to go to, seminars, at the same time as people speaking in the main hall. My husband hadn't been very well, so we actually left a day early.
Shortly after, Joan Ryan's assistant emailed Robin asking him to be a witness to Jean's alleged act of anti-Semitism.
I kind of feel it was an anti-Semitic, trope against Israel and like Jews controlling and having power and money. I thought I think, although she didn't say Jews and she said Israel, it's definitely on the line. Do you know what I mean? Because if she had said the word Zionist, I would have said 100%, 100%.
Despite being unsure of what he had witnessed, Richardson had no qualms about the expulsion of a fellow Labour Party member.
How it works is, you make the complaint and then the Labour Party within their own rules will decide. I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect this woman might be potentially banned, but she did say something that was anti-Semitic.
After Jean had left the conference, she was contacted by a Labour Party investigator. He would only say that it was about a serious incident.
I was thinking, had I seen a fire take place? Had I seen someone throw a bottle? Had I seen a fight break out? I was really racking my brains thinking, what incident had I seen? Was I aware of? Was I a witness to something? And almost by return came an email that it was my conduct that was being investigated. I was totally shocked. That was like a real bombshell.
The names that we got into the embassy, Charlie?
And just now got the money. It's more than £1 million. It's a lot of money. And then and now I got the money. So from Israel. So it's not physical. Yeah, it's approval. And then
I didn't think you had it in your bag.
This is Maria Strazzolo, a British civil servant active with the Conservative Friends of Israel. She's a longtime confidant of MP and Conservative Minister Robert Halfon. She's at dinner with Shai Massoud, a senior political officer with the Israeli embassy in London, who enjoys diplomatic immunity.
And the last position that I applied for, that there is a slight chance I will get it, actually, is to be head of the Foreign Affairs Department of the Intelligence Department in Israel. I'm not a career diplomat.
Their dinner party also included an undercover reporter from Al Jazeera's investigative unit who captured a most undiplomatic conversation.
Can I give you some MPs that I suggest that you would take down?
Well, you know, if you look hard enough, I'm sure that there is something that we're trying to hide.
Yeah, I have some of these.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. No, she knows we can't be the one thing, the question.
Well, it's good to remind me.
The Deputy Foreign Minister.
He's referring to Sir Alan Duncan, a minister in Britain's Foreign Office, who has publicly opposed Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian land.
This exchange between the political officer of the Israeli embassy and a parliamentary staffer about taking down, is the phrase used, Alan Duncan, is outrageous. It's shocking.
We still want to.
No, he's doing a lot of forward.
I thought we had.
Sounds like a conspiracy.
A little bit, no?
No. Boris? He basically good. Yeah, he just don't care. He's busy with other things. Boris is busy, you know?
Boris Johnson is Alan Duncan's boss and Britain's foreign secretary.
He's an idiot, but so far he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs without any kind of responsibility. So technically, if something will happen, it won't be his fault.
The Israeli diplomat features prominently in The Lobby, a 4-part documentary series scheduled for premiere January 15th. Seeking to topple members of parliament or a government minister like Sir Alan Duncan is a line that few foreign embassies would be willing to cross. It's a scandal the Netanyahu government must now answer for, as well as the British civil servant who entertained it. Clayton Swisher, Al Jazeera, London.
And it's the same thing with Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. Now, there has been a very sinister alliance between the Jewish groups who are acting as Israeli agents in British society and British ruling elites who dread the prospect of a Corbyn victory, because Corbyn is the real deal. Bernie's basically Corbyn light. Yes, but it's not bad, because Corbyn's he's the real deal. He doesn't like the idea of homelessness in this world. He's not the kind of guy who thinks it's enough to put $1 in their cup on your way to the Hamptons. So, what you have in the UK is an unusual phenomenon, because historically the Jewish groups, the mainstream Jewish groups, they played the anti-Semitism card every time Israel faced a public relations debacle for one of its periodic massacres. And they would start charging all the critics of being anti-Semitic, which is a familiar and old tune. However, now, in the case of Corbyn, the British ruling elites decided, let's join in with these Jewish groups who are acting at Israel's behest, but let's use that charge to try to discredit Corbyn so that he won't get elected, not because they care about Israel, but because they care about preserving a status quo from which they've benefited. And so now, across the board, it's a really astonishing thing to observe from afar, as I have closely. From the Guardian newspaper on the so-called left to the Daily Mail on the so-called right, and everything in between, BBC, Sky News, The Times, they're all claiming that Jeremy Corbyn is a dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite, and that anti-Semitism has been institutionalized in the Labour Party. That's the term they use. It's been institutionalized. If you look at the most recent polls, 2/3 of British polled think Corbyn now is an anti-Semite, which is kind of loony if you know who he is and what he stands for. And it's almost certain, well, first of all, so far it appears it hasn't had much of an effect on likely voters in an election, because the attitude is, well, maybe he's an anti-Semite, but really who cares, because we care about those economic issues, which is what he's talking about. So they accept that he might be or is, but they don't really, it's not going to change their vote. And what's happening in the UK is basically a dress rehearsal for what's going to happen here. Now, of course, it's going to be difficult to make the charge of anti-Semite stick on Bernie Sanders for a number of reasons, which most of you seem to have an intuitive grasp of, not least his Brooklyn Jewish accent. However, he is surrounded by a lot of people on whom that charge will stick. Right now in the UK, the Labour Party, in order to deflect the allegation of anti-Semitism, has been carrying on all these purges of alleged anti-Semites in the party, many of whom I know by reputation, and the allegations are completely nuts. But the Labour Party, in my opinion, stupidly believing you can appease these forces, and stupidly believing it has anything to do with anti-Semitism, has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. The case of the Jewish organizations, it's Israel, it's not anti-Semitism. And the case of British elites, it's holding on to a status quo from which they've benefited. In the US, it's interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch because it's the prelude to what's going to come next year. How Bernie is reacting to Ilhan Omar, because they're waiting to see if he distances himself publicly from her. They know he will start carrying on the same purges as are going on in the Labour Party in the UK, and his campaign will be destroyed from within. Because they'll find Ilhan Omar-type remarks in 10,000 people surrounding Bernie's campaign. And so far, to my surprise, I might say, he's been supporting her. And that's a good sign, that he's not going to let them use the anti-Semitism charge to wreck his campaign, as is now being used in the British case in an attempt to wreck Jeremy Corbyn's campaign. But it will come. There was just a report yesterday that AIPAC had these advertisements in Facebook attacking Bernie for his statements on Israel, or alleged statements on Israel. Now, as I said, I don't think it's going to be easy to make them stick with him, but it's going to be a problem with a lot of people around him. And we're going to have to wait and see how he handles it. And hopefully people like Ilhan Omar and AOC will figure out a way how to be principled on the one hand, but not hand anything to these thugs and machinators, anything to them that will make it easy for them to discredit Bernie's supporters and will force him to publicly distance himself, which I think will be a complete disaster. So far, so good. But it's going to be a tough battle. And if you have any curiosity about how it will play out, just take a gander across the pond and watch what they've been doing to Corbyn. It's been nonstop. Last summer, for 3 months, non-stop. Every newspaper, every news program was just the German anti-Semitism.
Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then there are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people, and they have power, money, and media, and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism. And it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.